And with that, I will pass the webinar to Mara to begin today's presentation.
All right, thank you, Laurel. So yeah, as Laurel was saying, essentially my background with Tasktop I've been here around 6+ years, a little over 6 years now. As she was suggesting, I started out in our product team, so I was working with our engineers and building all of our integration, what we call connectors. Then we'll touch on what that is briefly. And then I moved into the pre-sale side to work with more on the customer-facing side, help solve real business problems and just help people with their integration problems. And then recently we switched up the roles a little bit, and we've moved into a more of a end-to-end bigger picture consulting slash advisor role, where we don't just focus on small, very isolated problems, but we also try to look at the whole end-to-end value stream and try to see where we can help. Today's presentation, as Laura was saying, I'm just going to be walking through a couple of things that I've recently stumbled across and seen out there around integration needs and integration patterns and integration stories, and it will be mostly focused on Atlassian, Jira, Atlassian Service Desk. So just a couple of the Atlassian suite tools. We'll focus on that today. So just to tell you a little story of how I got to actually doing today's webinar, and just so you'd understand where and why I thought this would be a really interesting topic to share and talk about. If you've ever previously seen anything with Tasktop and seen anybody on our side talk about what we do and what our product does, we generally talk about integrating you could call them the four big aspects of software delivery lifecycle. Or I generally like to show this picture and say we're essentially trying to connect all four of these corners and make sure that there's no gaps, make sure that the manual duplicate data entries eliminated, making sure that we're finding those bottlenecks. And that's kind of what we usually talk about and tell our customers what we do, but we put it in a context of best of breed tools. We usually talk about integrating multiple different tools, and you can see a massive list that we generally show to folks and say, okay, so there's probably quite a few tools that you already have on this list that we might be able to help with filling some of those gaps. Now, what I've recently realized is that we might not even need to go to this extensive list of tools, and we might see some integration needs and some of the exact same problems within just a single suite of tools, or a single tool stack, or a single vendor's tool, if you will. So where this whole started was a couple of weeks ago when we were at the Atlassian Summit, and we had our little booth for Tasktop, and we had a whole bunch of existing customers there, but we had a bunch of new people walk up to us and of course ask, like, what does Tasktop do, etc. And actually a bunch of people walked by, and when we said we're an integration software, we connect the software SDLC tools out there, a lot of people said, oh, well, we have everything at Atlassian, we don't need integration. And that was just an interesting observation that I started seeing in the beginning of the conference. But then when I started continuing these conversations with the customers, and just to have a conversation, understand more about their environments, understand more about what they're using from that Atlassian suite and what their process looks like, I actually discovered that there's yes, people use different aspects of Atlassian, so like Service Desk, Jira software. But the other interesting thing that I started noticing and seeing is that people actually use a lot of different kind of variations of, for example, Jira. So I heard a lot of scenarios where people use Jira Service Desk for their Service Desk team, and they use Jira software for their development teams. Other examples where a lot of people were moving to cloud with the Atlassian's movement and announcement about their cloud offerings, then a lot of people obviously were interested in that as well. So then I got in a lot of conversations where people were using Jira Data Center for their massive implementations on site, but then they had certain teams utilizing Jira Cloud for convenience, for efficiency, and things like that. So I started realizing that if we generally talk about integrating multiple different vendor tools, then in this scenario, it was almost a very interesting conversation that we didn't even have to look past Jira to find integration needs. And I'll talk through a couple of very specific examples in just a moment. But that essentially was kind of my revelation during the Atlassian Summit, during that conference, and understanding that we truly don't have to go outside a single vendor to potentially find the need for integration. And I think the other flip side of this is that a lot of times people and the folks that were passing our booth they also didn't think they need integration, or that they have an integration problem or a business problem that could be solved with integration because they have Jira, right? They're using Jira across the board. But as I started kind of asking more questions and deeper questions, I started realizing that you don't necessarily need different vendor tools to need integration, essentially. So what I want to do now is Laurel is going to help me with this. We're going to actually take a really quick poll, because I do want to see from the people that are on the webinar, just kind of understand how many different aspects of Atlassian do you use. The reason I'm asking aspects of Atlassian is because I understand some people just have Jira, some people are using, Jira Service Desk, some people are using potentially many different instances. So I just wanted to see what everybody has seen or experienced, or maybe not even current job, maybe in previous lives you've been in a situation where you've had very many instances of Jira, for instance. So just kind of trying to get a pulse on the attendees to understand what has everybody seen. And Laurel, let me know when, maybe we'll give it a few more seconds until everybody answers, and then you let me know when that is done. Okay, looks like we've got some good answers. Okay, great. So interestingly, looks like it is a pretty common scenario. Like I said, what I learned during that conference is pretty similar to what I'm seeing in the results. That there's a part of people that is just one Jira, one single instance, totally fine. Tasktop, our development team, also uses one Jira instance. I see that most of the people, though, are utilizing kind of different instances of Atlassian, which is great. And then some people are essentially have the whole suite, which is also great. So that is awesome. Thank you, everybody, for filling that out. So that just gives me an idea that, yep, the things that I've prepared today might be very relevant. So before we go into, so one of the things, just from what to expect, I do have a live demo. So I will talk about it in just a few minutes, just so everybody sees a little bit of the theoretical side and a little bit of live action. But before I jump into that, I just kind of wanted to talk about, again, from my experience at the Atlassian Summit, but also from just a pure experience with our enterprise customers, and not just integrating Jira, but these same benefits apply when you do have those multiple Jira instances or different teams, or geographically separately located teams, or so the benefits will still hold true. But I'll walk through the four kind of main ones that I thought of that I would share today. So one of the probably most obvious first benefit that everybody always sees and gains is no manual handovers, no duplicate data entry. I was just on a customer site yesterday where this term that I've now heard multiple times came up, which was a swivel chair. So you go to your right and you get your work, get your story on your board, or in whatever format your work comes into the queue. but then you have to turn over to the left and re-enter that data again for somebody else to consume it, or for some other reporting need or visibility need. So just that need to go back and forth, back and forth. So that's one of the biggest reasons for integration, and one of the probably first reasons that customers actually realize that they need integration. There are other benefits, and some of these might be actually more important from an enterprise level, from a organizational level, when it comes to what's happening and what's happening within your process. So essentially, the ability to trace your work through the systems and through the teams. If you are using multiple instances of Jira, if you're using multiple different aspects of Jira, maybe you have a team over somewhere else using Jira Service Desk, and you have a team on a local version of Jira using being used for your development work. So again, just being able to understand, okay, where did the work come from? Where did the work go? And we're going to actually see a great example of that live here in a moment. The other interesting thing that sometimes people don't think about from an integration perspective, but that has come in extremely handy, and I'm going to mention a very specific example from my Atlassian Summit experience, is accommodating organizational changes. So interestingly, we do work with a lot of companies who've either merged, acquired another company, but essentially you're getting new teams on board. And to not disrupt people's day-to-day work, because the acquisition itself is enough, you essentially allow the teams to be smoothly integrated into your existing work, to not disrupt their daily jobs and what they're already used to. So there's quite a lot of benefit in these mergers and acquisitions scenarios. The other interesting thing is, I said partner connections, but I think there's a term out there that's called e-bonding. I think a more previous term being used sometimes was supply chain, but I like just calling it partner connections. If you have a partnering team, partnering company that is potentially outside of your own realm of tools, you still might need an integration, or might benefit from an integration, to not have that swivel chair via email, for example, because updating stories and epics and things like that via email is probably not the most efficient way if you're trying to collaborate with other teams, essentially. And then before I move on to the last one, I think these are all are very, very focused, as you can see, to just improving that collaboration between the teams and not letting the physical separation of instances and tools get in the way. But the last one that sometimes also people don't realize or think of is that with an explosion of instances and tools and servers, you are essentially losing out on being able to consolidate your reporting and consolidate the data, so that you would have actual across the board visibility into what's happening. Best example is if you have 5 different Jira instances and your executive asks, okay, what is the distribution of work percentage wise this month? Like, how much have we spent on new feature work? How much have we spent on defects, etc.? Like, you want to know what's your kind of distribution of work. And interestingly, if you have 5 different Jiras, you just can't answer that question without manual intervention. So that is the kind of the last thing that sometimes people don't think of, but is an extremely high value benefit for the organizations and enterprises we work with. And best practices, most common scenarios, I figured I'll talk about these 2, I think, yes. So these, I'm just going to mention 2 scenarios, and then I'm going to show a live demo of this, because I think having gone through a couple of these examples will let folks understand sort of what the capabilities are, and how I like to think about best practices, and how to think about kind of structuring your integrations. So one of the most common scenarios out there for either a Jira Suite, Atlassian Suite, or non-Atlassian Suite is the Service Desk integrations with your development. So being able to making sure that as your support tickets and support requests come in and they need development attention, you make that you make that connection and that team collaboration seamless. Allow each of the teams stay in their tool of choice, and the updates stay, both systems stay up to date at all times, so you have that most up-to-date information. And we're going to see an example today with this about, and I'm just going to use the notion of a new feature request. So if I have my service desk facing customers, or potentially external or internal customers, either way. But as folks are submitting requests for new functionality, I'm going to show how my product team that's working on a data center Jira, and my development team is also working on that. You can essentially create that seamless connection between the two so that it's always up to date. The other interesting use case is, or the other angle to look at what is possible with integration and what benefits it yields, and what essentially is very common to take advantage of, is if you do have multiple Jira instances, multiple Jira teams, multiple boards, whatever is the separation of context within your Jira instances, it's essentially allowing the teams to share work and be aligned, but not having to log in two places, or track two boards, or not having to update two places. So again, it's truly allowing that individual to stay within their context. So either it's a product manager staying in their product management board, developers staying on their development instance, so but still being connected to the other groups. So just being able to not cause any extra context switching for your individuals, but still keep them connected. So I think that's kind of the holy grail of what we're trying to do. But what that essentially looks like, the idea is if you have a system instance, a Jira instance that is working, for example, product management, or maybe this is just a separate team, but then you have another instance. I just called it product management and development for the purpose of this kind of idea. But you can think that product management has their own set of process. They have their own set of work and steps and things that they're essentially doing. However, part of it might be inclusive of some development work. So while it's not something that product will, sometimes a product manager will update, you will still want to see that visibility, and vice versa. A developer doesn't want to check back into the product board and try to figure out what to update and things like that. So the example that I'm showing here is I'm essentially saying, so there might be some life with your features and requests before it actually enters your kind of product management work. But then once it's accepted, at that point, you're tying into your development. The next step could be, from a development perspective, you might have 3 to 5 different steps within their process. But from that kind of high level visibility board, you only want to know that it's in development. You might want to know that, once it's done, it's just development done. But after it's been development done, you might have some, I don't know, document updates or completed sign-offs by your BAs or whatever is the process. But just showing that your either it's a product manager, either it's a service desk person. The same exact idea could be applied on a service desk side. They can stay within their tool, they can see their context, but they're still connected to that development team. And we're actually going to see that as an example in just a moment. So I am going to move over and actually show a little bit of a live example, because I believe live examples are probably most interesting to everybody. So this particular, what you see here is actually an instance of Tasktop, and I just set up a bunch of integrations for the purpose of today's presentation. And this is sort of talking through, piecing together everything that I talked about so far, but giving a very specific example. And what I'm showing, like just to reiterate, is an example. So I made up this little scenario, but this is a pretty common way that we see people just starting out their kind of integrations. So we'll start on the left just to make it a little easier to follow what I'm doing. We're gonna see, like I said, a ticket come into my Jira service desk from an internal or external customer asking for some new functionality. I recorded in format of incidents on my service desk side. we'll see that flow over to my product data center Jira as an epic, because that is just how we communicate between the two teams. In product Jira, I can either break this epic down and start work on it, or my other option, going back to my conversation about partner connections and e-bonding and that sort of stuff, is I could essentially mark my epic in a certain way to say, actually, this epic needs to be worked on by our some partner team or external team, whatever you would want to refer to it, that has a whole separate instance of Jira, and that one is in the cloud, so that's on demand. But I essentially need that epic to be executed on by this certain external team. So what we're going to see is we're going to see that same epic being triaged as a product team. I'll show how I'm triaging it. And that epic is then going to flow over to my external team's cloud instance, and we're going to see it being broken down into stories. I'm going to do some updates. I'm going to send some. I'm going to update the status. So the beautiful thing about this is going to be that from the moment that we create that level of communication across the board, things like status, things like whatever mappings I've set up will stay in sync across the board. So that's going to be kind of our main focus here, to show that if I have some third party executing on some of my work, that's okay and that's great, and we can tie them into the whole life cycle, and we don't have to do that swivel chair updates left and right if we don't want to. And then the last thing that I'm gonna, if we have a couple minutes, but what is happening behind the scenes is I'm essentially saying, as I'm doing all these steps, as I'm working in Service Desk, as I'm working in any of the instances, I don't want to have to log into each one of those Jira instances to get some metrics and reports. Like I said, for example, distribution of work, or how long did it take to close things. The beauty is that what's happening in the background is all of it is based on what I've set up here is flowing into that central database. So I can easily start building some kind of metrics and visuals and visibility into what is actually happening. But we'll start with the top layer here, and that will give us a really nice kind of a live idea of what's happening. So I'm going to start by I'm going to start by taking the mouse back. There we go. I'm going to start by opening a request here in Service Desk. So let me zoom in just a bit and refresh my page so I can make sure I'm logged in everywhere. So all I'm going to do is submit a new request. And like I said, I'm just going to ask for a new feature request. I'm going to call it demo feature request. Let's say that. And I'm going to add some more information here. So all I'm doing from a customer perspective, I'm just following the process, filling out the details. And now as a customer, this particular item, this demo feature request is my kind of point of reference. This is what I'm following. This is what I'm looking at, right, as a customer to be filled in, for example. Interestingly, what I've set up behind the scenes, that integration that I just showed on the landscape view, is that the integration is continuously running, and as these feature requests are being submitted, I just send them over to product as epics, because I want product team to be notified instantly. So what has happened, as you'll already see, is that I created this little custom link that shows product link, and it is already populated with my product link from my product Jira instance. And what this essentially tells me is that, okay, integration has taken place. It has gotten to the product team, and this gives me a little bit of that traceability that I'm talking about, where you can start tracing your work all throughout, no matter what physical system it resides on. But if I now go over to my product backlog, for example, just to show, and we're gonna actually open it up on a Kanban board so that we can see the status updating much easier. Okay, so I didn't even have to refresh. Now we can see the way that I structured my Kanban board is just pretty straightforward. I created a top swim lane for epics and a bottom one for stories, and defects, just to make it easier to demo for today. But what we'll see here is that my demo feature request has been created in this particular board. And if I open it up in a new tab, you'll see that the same idea holds true here, where you can see request URL actually points back to the service desk. So again, from a traceability perspective, I know where this particular item came from. If I need to find it, I can, but I know the originator, I know where it got created in. What I'm going to do, just for the sake of the demo, I'm going to say that this particular feature request has to be addressed by our external team, by our team that is working on a separate instance, in a separate instance, but we still want to have their work visible here. So I'm going to assign a component. The triage piece that I essentially added here, as I said, the moment I add external API as my component, the integration picks it up again and sends it over to my external team, Jira team. And that's, if I click refresh here, and I click refresh a couple times because my integration is running about every, I think, 10 seconds. I've set it to 10 seconds, which actually brings me to a good point. You can set your integration interval to as often as you want. So I've set it up to, I think, 10 or 15 seconds. So when I refresh again, you'll see that now I have a new custom link field that says external team link, which actually gives me the true traceability of, okay, this request originated in my service desk, but then my external team link essentially holds my other team's Kanban board. If I come back over here this is my third instance of Jira. I know that everything looks similar, but you can see that this is a cloud instance, so it has a little bit of a different look and feel. And we can see that my epic has already fallen in here in my epics queue. And if I open it, the idea will be similar. I can have, just to show a little bit of flexibility, you can have kind of a trace back to my product team, but this time I utilized a hyperlink instead of a custom field, just to show how you have some flexibility. You don't have to have a custom field. That particular traceability that I just showed, starting from having it back in the service desk tool all the way through any team that is executing on the work, it's optional. So this is not required to make the integration work, but this is pretty helpful in my opinion to get this going. So from now on, what you can do is, like I said, we might be kind of creating some potentially some user stories in here in my external Jira team. They might be saying essentially that my epic will take, let's create another user story 1 and user story 2. We'll add both of them as children for this particular feature request epic. And if I refresh my epic, so here in my external team's Jira, you'll essentially see that I have those 2 stories now as children marked and linked. But all that I'm trying to do here is say, okay, so I've received it from my product team and I've broken it down, and now we're going to essentially be executing on it. If I go back to my Kanban board here for my external Jira team, and let's say, and here's my 2 user stories on the bottom left here. Let's say we want to kind of communicate that we've started working on these things. So I'm going to go ahead and bring those in progress. I'm going to bring the stories, both of the stories in progress. And as another thing, I'm going to take this epic and I'm going to throw in a comment, and I'm going to say, provide more UI mockups or something like that, whatever would be kind of a little bit of a feedback from my external team. So now, once I go over back to my product team board, so let's say, again, this is all happening on a completely separate instance, completely separate potentially team structure or team process, but we still, as we're on our product team's board here, you can already see, you might have already noticed that jump, but you'll see that now my epic progress gets updated and my user story progress gets updated. So from a product team's perspective, or whoever is the development team or product team, whoever's monitoring a bigger set of work, you can still see the progress and the status updates regardless of where the work is being executed in. And that's kind of the beauty of it. And if we go all the way back to our service desk, so let's go over to our demo feature here in service desk. I'm going to go to my list of requests, and you'll actually see that my demo request now has been updated as work in progress. So this is the neat thing, that as work is being executed potentially 3 hops down the line, we still are able to communicate it all the way back to the very origin of the item. And the other thing is, I know I've been focusing on status because status and traceability are probably top 2 things that we get asked for as a company. This is not just applying to status and the traceability pieces. You can make changes to any of the other aspects to that as well. Let's say if you just wanted to update description and things like that. So all of that is also kind of kept in sync based on the mapping that I set up here before I joined the call. So just to kind of make sure that's clear, that it's not just the traceability pieces and status that you can share across the board, it's all of those other aspects as well. But traceability and status progress updates throughout your life cycle are probably the 2 most often kind of asked things or problematic things that we see with our customers. Just to show, and you can see that the change actually got populated here already. So just to show kind of a completion of the story, and that'll be kind of the end of this little live demo for me. But you'll essentially, let's say at some point we go ahead and finish our feature or finish our epic, and let's say we want to communicate that all of that is good and done. You'll see that once I jump over my demo, again, my epic already jumped into done, so I know that's good and over. And if I go back to my my list, you can see that it actually disappeared from my open list. But if I actually look at my recently resolved, you'll see that my demo FR change has also been closed. So this is a more debatable topic, because a lot of times you might not want your service desk tickets to be closed automatically, but you might have some sort of an interim status that says development complete or resolved, ready for sign off. So there's a lot of possible debate there on how you want to align the statuses. I just wanted to kind of show a complete circle of steps. Alrighty, so I know I kind of ran through that, but that I think gives at least somewhat of an idea of how a live connection can look between these systems, between various different Jira instances and servers. And obviously, we're always happy to give more details if anybody's interested. But since we are running out of time, so I'll take a pause there and see if there's any questions or comments from the room. And yeah, Laurel, then see if there's anything else we want to cover.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mara. We do have a few questions. I'm going to bunch a couple together that I think will go kind of hand in hand. But a few questions we got. So the first is, are separate connectors required for each Jira tool, such as a service desk connector versus a Jira software connector? And then follow up to that is, do you need to have login access to each of the Jiras in order to put the links and updates from one to the other?
Awesome. Those are great questions. So in my scenario, the only, I don't need a different, essentially, you don't have to ever worry about what we're using behind the scenes. The beauty of this is that all you have to say, we use Jira as kind of like a generic term here. So you'll see that Jira will actually include service desk as well. And you'll see that I've connected to actually 4 different Jira instances. I have Jira Cloud, Data Center, Service Desk, which is also cloud, but a different instance. And then I have another data center. So interestingly, you're kind of utilizing what we've built, but you can, these are physical separate systems, but you don't necessarily need like a separate connector, if you will. All of that is baked into Tasktop and done for you. But yes, you need, actually, that's one thing that the second question was about credentials. So yes, there's a need for set of credentials that we're using for communicating via the APIs. So in this scenario, you can see for my cloud instance, I'm using an email and an API token, for instance. For an on-premise Jira, I might be just using a set of standard credentials because on-premise Jira doesn't require API token. So different options, there's flexibility there.
Awesome. So another question we have is there a way to find out how much work any given user has contributed to as a developer using Jira?
So I think that would be more of a question on how Jira is being utilized. If you're talking about true time, like actual physical time, then I think it would be an interesting conversation to understand how it's being tracked and if it's being tracked, especially these days with Agile, it's not as common anymore. But if you're just talking about being able to say, okay, what are my people working on? What are they working on? Features, defects, technical debt, risk, or whatever is the type of work that they're doing. Yeah, that you can do across the board utilizing integrations, or obviously you can just go in and create Jira, like for reports for a single Jira.
Awesome. Next question is a 10-second refresh interval typical for a multi-team enterprise scenario?
That's also, it's a 10 seconds is where people a lot of times start if you know that your integrations are, medium size. And medium size, I mean, we can still be talking about 2,000 actively integrating users, actively working users. But what I see from our enterprise customers is it varies between 10 seconds and a minute. Depending on what systems you're connecting to. But the beauty is that you can actually toggle each of these 3 systems. So I have 4 Jira instances. I could set each one of them being pulled at a different interval. If I knew that, for instance, this particular Jira is super loaded and we shouldn't be hitting it as often, set it to a minute. So there's capabilities there to make sure that it's the most optimized.
Awesome. And I think we have time for just one more question. If we didn't get to yours, we will be following up. The last question we have for today is, once you have multiple Jiras connected, if one instance of Jira has an add-on, can another tap into it?
So that will be dependent on what you mean by if it has an add-on. I'll give a very specific example. There's a bunch of add-ons that create some custom fields. So in certain scenarios, yeah, you can start mapping those custom fields. Like I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head, but the long answer short will be depends on what add-on and depends what you want to start tapping back and forth. Sometimes there can be fields that are, they're custom fields, super simple, but some plugins have like a whole brand new delegated UI that is completely separate from the base Jira. In those scenarios, there can be some limitations, but generally, if you're talking about fields, that's a fair game.